We recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississauga, the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dishwit-Wanspoon Wampum Bell Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. This land acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities in improving Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples, and today's annual Robarts lecture will help us in this task by providing some insights into the perspectives and cultural worldviews of the Inuit. As you know, the annual Robarts lecture presents the work of distinguished Canadianists honored for their career-long contributions to various disciplines. These internationally recognized scholars provide thought-provoking work on some of the most important issues in the study of Canada. So we're very fortunate to have Professor Anna Hudson joining us today. She agreed to share her thoughts with a lecture entitled Qummut Qukiria, Art, Culture, Sovereignty Across Nunaat and Sápmi, Mobilizing the Circumpolar North. Anna Hudson is a professor of art history and visual culture in the School of the Arts, Media, Performance, and Design at York University, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. An art historian and curator, Professor Hudson specializes in modern and contemporary circumpolar Indigenous art and performance and 19th and 20th century art in Canada. In today's Robarts lecture, Professor Hudson will discuss the rise of Inuit and Sámi voices and cultural worldviews at a time when circumpolar Indigenous homelands are most vulnerable to climate change, resource extraction, and Arctic development. Once the lecture is completed, we will have a chance for a brief Q&A period, and I invite you to send your question via the Q&A button or function at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, Anna, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Michel. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving me this opportunity. Qummut Qukiria, up like a bullet. It's a slang term that I learned along the way. And for me, it just captured that excitement and exhilaration of cultural expression of the wonderful people I've had the opportunity to work with over the last really nearly 10 years now. And I'm just going to go to my first slide here. So Mobilizing Inuit Cultural Heritage was a SSHRC partnership grant that I had the fortune to be the principal investigator of. I had very many important and wonderful colleagues on it, including Dr. Susan Dion, Dr. Carla Rice, Dr. Nancy Wakowicz at the University of Aberdeen, and Dr. Heather Igloliorte, my Inuit colleague at Concordia University. Probably one of the major revelations that I had was the idea of the centrality of culture. And my work beforehand was looking at socially conscious art by settler artists. And that was just so wonderful to discover a viewpoint that looked at culture as foundational to health. And hopefully future work will take me more in that direction of looking at the internet connection between cultural health and identity and well-being, and that an expanded, or let's say expansive, definition of culture to include not only worldviews and ways of being in the world, but hunting and sewing and always thinking about what that means for me as a settler scholar. So I ask, is putting cultural health first a radical act of decolonization? The Qummut Qukiria book is co-edited with Jan-Erik Lundström, who's a Swedish curator specializing among other things, Sámi art, and he's been an incredible resource. My talk today will talk more about my closer work with Inuit colleagues, but the book itself it has a tremendous amount of Sámi content. Also co-edited with Heather Igloliorte. And we have 4 sections in the book. The book will be available in July. It's been a long process dealing with supply chain issues, including paper of all things. We start with land and language, decolonial practices, community, and circumpolar resilience, the idea that this is a kind of crescendo of activity we're seeing. There has truly been a sea shift since 2012, when the Mobilizing Inuit Cultural Heritage project began. It's been really interesting to see very young artists now become established artists, to see way more people, way more Inuit, way more Sámi in leadership roles. It's been very fulfilling in that regard. I'm starting with this installation shot from All These Tundras. All These Tundras is an exhibition that was curated by Heather Igloliorte and students, one of the Mitch projects, and we call it for short form Mitch. And Tacklelik Partridge, who I've worked with for a very long time, has done these rather strange pieces on the wall. And they are mostly beaded, they're distinctive shape. These are sort of like appliques that one would see women put on a mauti, or the parkas, sometimes called women's parkas, but actually men can wear them too, that have this special distinction of having a large hood and a pouch in which you can carry your baby on your back. And that baby learns everything alongside you, seeing essentially everything that you're doing. And so Tacklelik has taken this form, which interestingly enough also looks very much like the semel or sole of a kamek or boot. So it also has this double entendre of being, you're grounding, where your body meets the earth, so to speak. And I want to just go back and point out to that small image at the bottom in that cardboard. Picturligit is the word in Utitu, and it's don't forget. And we're going to come back to this word on several occasions over the course of today's talk. It's, in this case, it's a piece of a cereal box that she's cut out and written in, grease marker or crayon or whatever's at hand. And one of the things here is, don't forget, everything you have in the Arctic is precious because it's sent up by sea lift. And in terms of traditional Inuit ways of living on the land, everything was used. Every piece of the body of an animal or a bird or everything was used. And it's a reminder, don't forget. And in this instance, we have Tacklelik's beaded an Arctic char. And that Arctic char is accompanied by other samples. Here we are close up. These are images that Tacklelik has taken herself. And in that center is frozen food packaging. Tacklelik was living in Sápmi or Sámiland, now living in Ottawa again. But, just like frozen reindeer that you can get in the markets in northern Norway, for example. And here you see it's a bit damaged, but she still beaded it and made it look, she had to put really lots and lots of tassels on it to make up for the plastic. But it's, even the garbage, right, is something that one reuses or something that one considers. So you've got the Arctic char, you've got the refuse, now looking something like a jellyfish or something. And below on the Arctic char, you've got pennies hanging. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the tuktu or caribou, which, in terms of the preciousness of creatures that nourish you and clothe you, the tuktu or caribou is very precious. And so at the bottom there, Tacklelik has hung these coins that say royal plus they're actually laundromat tokens, but it's apropos of acknowledging the preciousness of this animal. That Arctic char is an homage to Qunuyuaq-Ashevak's Luminous Char. On the project, we did Tunica, and it was an exhibition that Mitch did in partnership with the Art Gallery of Ontario. Tacklet Partridge, Lackaluke Williamson Bathory, Jocelyn Pyramid, and Qummut Qukiria or Kuzi Curly were the curators, and then myself and Georgiana facilitating that project. And it featured the work of Qunuyuaq-Ashevak and her nephew, Tim Pitsulak, and the whole history of the Inuit art market. I mean, you know, one can have a push-pull with that market. Most of us are familiar, you know, most of us are familiar with the Inuit world through that market. It's showcased the work of artists in Qinghai or Cape Dorset primarily. It's been active since the 50s. But interestingly enough, it's that portal, and I actually walked through that portal, and I don't know, don't want to maybe say a date, but you know, the annual print run, and I was still in high school, and that was the beginning, I think, of you know, an awareness and really a love for Inuit art. So Luminous Char, that's just a reference to that exhibition. And you know, one of the most famous works by Qunuyuaq-Ashevak is the Enchanted Owl that was on a stamp, I think 1970 or early 70s stamp. Interesting that our stamps used to be a way of really like establishing a common kind of repertoire of imagery. Cultural imagery is so difficult in a nation state, right, to create a common ground, but our stamps were a good effort at it. And it was a very interesting process. That's a work by Tim Pitsulak on the other side there, but this is a shot of the seal feast. I'm going to be showing video today, and sometimes we'll cut it short. I want to thank Alex Robarts for helping me navigate the difficulty of showing video through Zoom. So, but I want to show you a bit of that video. What was really interesting about it is, as the Inuit curators navigated how we were going to deal with the exhibition, the opening was going to be a seal feast, and the opening was not going to be a demonstration of a seal feast, but an actual seal feast that we were going to celebrate something that was profoundly important to Inuit, considering that all but one community in Nunavut, for example, is a coastal community. And so seal is an incredibly important sustenance. It's only Baker Lake that is not coastal. And so we'll just see how that goes. Oops, sorry. Yep. We're bringing the frozen seal into Walker Court at the AGO here. No one had ever seen a seal. It was the strangest thing that went over without a hitch, that Takerlik's niece, who had never eaten seal because she grew up in the South, could have some, that Peta, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, didn't show up. It was very magical. And Walker Court was owned by Indigenous people that evening. So that felt like that space was decolonized. I show this piece, it's one of my favorites, from Pat Feely's gallery. She's one of the longest running Inuit art galleries in the city. And this is one, of course, that would never sell, but it's one that's most meaningful to Inuit in terms of telling you how to properly carve that seal. And to do all sorts of different things with it. Inside the Tunica exhibition, Tunica meaning their gifts, or the gifts they gave us, meaning the artists, was a reference to James Houston, who was really responsible for starting that modern Inuit art market. And interesting that this co-op panel from the exhibition, written by Jocelyn Piernan, who's since gone on to be a curator at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, was the first to sort of tell artists what they should do for the Southern market. And in that center panel there, where you see the sort of crown, it asks you to make cribbage boards. It suggests that you make little totem poles, even though we're beyond the tree line. What looks like a false face mask, so wrong Indigenous culture, and to make sure it didn't smell. So no traditional tanning, making sure things were sort of tidied up. But it's been a tremendous repository of knowledge. This is Canadian Arctic producers, probably about 15 minutes away from York, or maybe 10, York University's Keele campus, where still you see this kind of object production still in full swing, and it's organized by community. All the communities, while Kingite is still the most famous, all the communities are represented, and each with their distinctive stone. This is the Kingite shelf with the dancing bears and all the kinds of work that became so most famous. That's the serpentinite, or that bright green stone that's local to Kingite. In the Tunica exhibition, Takerlik Partridge, who I'm doing some extra work on now, so I'm thinking about her a lot, did this hummock. And the hummock is a sort of a traditional hut. Was where when you were out in the land, you'd have a hut covered by skins. You'd maybe paper it on the inside with newspaper. Takerlik looked at the history of Inuit representation in newspapers, particularly New York Times, and thinking about, wouldn't it be strange, you were in the North, but the newspapers started to arrive, especially wartime and post-World War II, where that was when the really big changes occurred: settlement of the North, concern about ability of transatlantic flights, transarctic flights. So there was a sovereignty, and that word, a contested word, a sovereignty issue for the Canadian nation state. From an Inuit perspective, that sovereignty is completely differently defined. It has nothing to do with land ownership. The only thing you have sovereignty over is yourself and your own actions. And one can never be perfect, but you can aspire for your own sovereignty, appreciating that your life is lived relationally, and that you can't control the weather, you can't control the world. The lessons of Inuit and Indigenous peoples are so paramount now. So this is a avocation of a hummock, and all of these newspaper clippings that are reproduced here. Many are referencing Inuit, one referencing her father, who came down south with tuberculosis to go to a sanatorium, and footage of Kingite shot by Qummut Qukiria there through the little window, because you'd have a window out, and on these benches covered by caribou fur. Actually, they were reindeer fur, because that was easier to source. Are these iPads with poems and spoken word stories by Takerlik. She started her career, became well known first as a poet and spoken word artist. And you can see her poem, The Canadian. At the beginning of Tunica, we commissioned a work, that work by Takerlik in the middle, but also a work called Silak Patunga, or Hole in the Universe, that was prepared by Luke Williamson Bathory and Jamie Griffiths. And beside it hung this work, Kanoiwak Ashvat, Woman Who Lives in the Sun, another very famous piece from 1960 by her. And interesting, the facial tattoos. And this is the scene of how you entered the exhibition. The purpose was to transport you to Inuit Nunaat, or into Inuit land. And the video, which I think I will, because it doesn't play very well, unfortunately, over Zoom, I will just discuss. It's the cabin that Lakaluk and her family, her husband and 3 children, have north of Iqaluit. And that cabin is a place where one can practice traditional way of being on the land. And the hole in the universe is a little bit like, from a settler perspective, Star Trek wormhole, where you can go through time. And in it, we see Lakaluk, her ancient self and her current self. And Inuit naming practices and Inuit concepts of time confirm this sort of fluidity of past, present, and future. And that hole in the universe is a way of connecting not only all my relations, that is the sky, the sea, the land, but all the way through time. And in it, we see Lakaluk, who is Greenlandic Inuk, performing Wajirnak, which is a Greenlandic mask dance performance that is with face paint, and which is a very particular practice that is about inhibitions, prohibitions, entertainment, but that person had a serious role in society to shake up any denial, or and remind us of the necessity of honesty, of an integrity of value. I'm just going to skip that through and go to this slide here. In the book, Qummut Qukiria, Lakaluk has a story about killing a polar bear. That's a picture of her cabin. And one night she woke up, and at the very top window was a polar bear looking at her. And as Lakaluk describes it, as she looked out and the polar bear looked back at her, she could tell that which is the very most sort of special beast, was taking her all in, understood everything about her, smelling her all in. But there was only one thing she had to do, and that was to shoot it. And so she shot it and killed it. And this is immediately the neighbors at the next cabin, gutted it, butchered it, and so forth, in order to take everything and use it. Unfortunately, it was, the RCMP took it away because it was this incident, and the skin was taken away, and it took forever to get the skin back. But that's a picture of her little daughter with her hand on the front paw. As you'll read in the book, her encounter with the polar bear was gut-wrenching in so many ways, because it was one being with another being, one being saving themselves through a rifle, because that bear was going to come in. And discovering that bear had been rummaging in the dump. Everything that goes up north stays up north, right? Nothing comes right down to the dump. And actually had, plastic bags in its gut and so forth. But eventually, Lakaluk went on this year to become the Sobey Prize winner. And this is an installation shot on the left of her piece in the National Gallery of Canada. And that's the skin of that bear. And you see all those really interesting holes in it. That's the skin lost its integrity. You couldn't make a pair of pants or anything with it now. But this is his projection of drum dancing on this skin. Incredibly enough, the gallery allowed for a skin to be open in the space. Conservators, horrified by the fact that all of the things that come in on a skin, right, that can infest the gallery, but fortunately, it was allowed. And on Inurvik, this frame, that's a traditional drawing frame, and wonderful that she won the prize. Just looking at, all the things, I mean, it was really hard to decide what to show because I would keep you for days. But these are some archival images in a private collection. And on the left are these incredible images. This is from a Dr. Livingstone who was traveling in the Canadian Arctic in the 1920s. And those young girls on the left are from Mitamitalik, or Pond Inlet, as it was known. And I just point how gorgeous their clothing is, that the fur, the mix of fur, the patterning, the sewing, their hair, and extraordinary. But on the right, you see the Biotic, one of the most famous ships that used to travel back and forth and ended up becoming a ship that, brought increasing number of peoples up and took increasing number of Inuit down south who had TB. And it's the same story in Sápmi or Sámi land, where tuberculosis really ravaged Indigenous communities who, when forced settlement was occurring, ended up in cramped and impoverished housing situations, which led to the spread of the disease. And the story about, coming down south, losing your language, being away, if you made it for, 7 or more years, and coming back up estranged to your family, and the whole process of, what has become a phenomenon of Inuit in the urban context, and what it means for those people to navigate their identity. The changed archit, this is Tim Pitsulak's Canadrill from 2015. And it's an enormous piece. It was in the Tunica exhibition. There's Jocelyn looking at it in the vaults. But that Canadrill being one of the sounds of the North, because you have to pierce through the permafrost and into the bedrock in order to build, because if you build straight on the permafrost, your building will sink. So the houses are on stilts. And of course, climate change is making that melting permafrost an increasing issue in terms of the release of carbon dioxide and so forth. And then the phenomenon of, the co-op stores that you see some people, wearing traditional clothing, but, the one artist who's really made this kind of, navigation of different worlds most visible to us is Annie Pudugu. And this is a work from 2006 called Cape Dorset Freezer. So the co-op in Cape Dorset, where you could buy your skidoo. Unfortunately, very few dog teams being allowed. There was, a story that took a long time to come out was the shooting of sled dogs with forced settlement in the 1950s, and census taking and putting kids into the, Southern education system. And then a project that I'm starting to work on now in terms of nutrition and the necessity of getting back to country food, caribou, Arctic char, everything, bear meat, because of you see this freezer full of, like pizza pops and, all those kinds of things that we're very familiar with, and the nutrition value not being there. So some nutrition issues arising from the lack of centrality of culture, if you will, if we go back to where we began. So when that culture gets displaced from being central, all the ripple effect that occurs. I'm thinking about new work by Tacklelit Partridge, and this is in a touring exhibition that's on right now. And these are like oversized amauti, or those parkas. And if you look down the center line, you'll see a little gold thing, little bits of reference to decoration. And these are made from all sorts of different kinds of materials, including, again, newspaper and Tyvek and tarpaulin and so forth. And interesting to see how she's going back to an interest in materiality and what that means from an Inuit perspective. And those oversized amoutis reminding me of a story in the book that she wrote with her husband, Niels Alu Utsi. Well, he did the illustration, she did the story that you can read in the book. And it's about a giant who has a son, and the son leaves and she becomes very lonely. And she goes into a village and befriends a small boy. And interesting, you know, that there's a lot about, you know, loss and regaining, about difference, and then inhabiting one's difference throughout the work of the artists that were part of the Mobilizing Inuit Cultural Heritage project, including this giant, another giant, Akizu, or the soccer player that's on York's campus, which was a 2-year project working with Ruben Kumangapik and Qummut Qukiria. And this soccer player, you know, who would traditionally follow the kicked walrus skull across the tundra, frozen sea ice under the Aurora Borealis. And this giant, you know, forever Alaskan high kick, one of the traditional sports. And it was there, finished in time to welcome the International Indigenous Games, which was great. And it was a fascinating project. You know, part of it was a call from the university to decolonize the campus. And while it's there as a welcomer, especially to Inuit who come onto campus, it was a process of navigating the university systems and institutional processes and discovering where you could move through and where you hit the ground, right? And so, and it was a familiarity. I mean, Ruben and Kuzi were there for 2 years, and people walking by, you know, that was that walking by, hey, what are you doing? That kind of interaction, and making sure that, you know, it wasn't like there was an establishment of familiarity that to get past the, oh, you're of a different culture, oh, you're Inuit, to, oh, you're Ruben, you're Kuzi, you know. And I think that was an incredibly important process. Want to go back to Tarkalik's picturology, don't forget, right? Don't forget we're here. Don't forget that granite of that Akizu, that soccer player, that granite will outlive us all. And here again, just, you know, Tarkalik is using her materials, and I want to just play a little bit of this. This is by the collective in Mitametallic with Dr. Nancy Wakowicz, a sewing collective. So using materials, but relearning how to do those hidden stitch to make waterproof boots, learning the language again. This was a big part of the Mitch project. I'll just show a little bit of this.
I was just taking the fat off. After that, I'm gonna put it in the boiling, like very hot water. And the fur, I want to take it off. See some of it, okay.
Sewing up the holes.
Hey, let's go.
I'm just going to take us along here. You see those skins, they have to work them very hard. And if we go all the way here, we now see we're at the sewing stage. So from taking that hide, preparing it, stretching it, softening it, cutting it, and sewing it for the hidden stitch to make those hammocks waterproof. I'm just going to skip over these details of Taklik's work, seeing how those words, those newspaper, those perceptions, and how one navigates that identity. And I want to show you this. Oops, sorry. It's a little tricky.
I'm very lucky to have lived in the north, to have gone camping and ice fishing and berry picking, and like I miss it.
For a long time, I saw my heritage as more of a scar. It was something that, you know, if it brought me anything, it was usually pain.
I asked myself, does it mean to be Inuk? Is it just the physical? Do I just have to look Inuk to be Inuk?
We throw around a lot of these words to identify ourselves, and they're all true. Yes, I am white. I am Inuit. I am urban. I'm Canadian. I'm a millennial. You know, you can go on and on. And so what it means to be all of these things is recognizing your place in the world and then choosing who to be as a result of all of those things.
The fifth region was a feature film made on the Mitch project that looked particularly at urban identities. So there's 4 traditional Inuit homelands in Canada, and the fifth region, a term coined by the photographer Barry Pottle from Nunatsiavut, being the fifth region. And that was Josh Srebel and Nyap Saunders, both who live in Montreal and Toronto respectively. Exploring that navigation of their identity, that's particularly problematic. You know, when you live in, as in Josh's case, predominantly grew up in the South. Wanted to look here now at another big project. We're at 3:40, and I'll probably go until, if Jean-Michel, so you're okay with it, I'll go to close to 3:50 if that's okay. Okay. Great, thanks. So this was Sakyayuk, and Heather is from Happy Valley Goose Bay. And what was incredibly important for Heather, and really a big part of Mitch, was that we just didn't do Nunavut, that we did Nunatsiavut. So, you know, Newfoundland, Labrador, Inuit, and amazing project. First of all, this is a Nunavut artist, Peta Sila, Dancing Bear, gorgeous thing, like, you know, that big. This is an AGO piece. And that whole Inuit art market, you know, Heather taking an Inuit perspective on it and saying, you know what, there's a tremendous repository of knowledge here. So we're grateful to that market. Even though the art didn't stay up north, I mean, you know, most community members will say, oh, I didn't know my great grandfather was, you know, Peta Sila or something like that, although he was very prominent in the community. I had the great fortune of actually meeting him, and him confirming, because he was also a hunter, of course, you know, you're fully cultured, right? That bears do dance like this. But these were, you know, huge pieces of beautiful stone, and he would balance them perfectly. And Heather coming in and saying, you know, this is a safeguard of information. She did a call for Nunatsiavut for people to submit work. And it was an effort to cast a net over Nunatsiavut and to reclaim those artists who are under the radar. This is a work by Mike Massey, two sides of the same work. He's actually a well-known artist, a wonderful artist, and he just love this piece. This was in a community center in Happy Valley Goose Bay where she put the exhibition on. And from that, another exhibition happened at the Rooms in St. John's, the big museum in St. John's, Newfoundland. But you see how Mike has used antler and given it that, the shamanic drum dancer. It gives the real shift and tension of that body. And Victoria Flowers, who's known for her, garment making and her, just gorgeous embroidery of local flowers. And Jenny Williams, who her career has since skyrocketed, Naluit Night. And she did photography, and she's been doing a film as well of Naluit, which is distinctive to Nunatsiavut. It's a little bit like Newfoundland mummers, but the Naluit are, and let me go to the next image, are creatures that come in off the fog on January 6th, and they come into town and they chase all the children, scare the living daylights out of the kids in the communities in Nunatsiavut. And the only way you can keep them at bay so that they won't get you is to be able to speak Inuktitut. So, you have to be able to count, you have to be able to tell a story. And Jenny, who has lots of kids, was very funny because she said, all I have to do anytime, during the year, is to threaten my little ones who are being bad with the Naluit. And that's it, they're good as gold, right? Because, but again, it's totally don't forget. And one way to do that is to scare is through fear. And that, this is moving into the last section of the presentation now. This is a beautiful ink and pen drawing by Heather Campbell, a Nunatsiavut artist, called Methyl Mercury. This is Sedna or Niliayak, who's the woman in the sea who manages all the sea creatures, who without which Inuit wouldn't survive. Methyl mercury infecting those waters, strangling Nuliayak. So she's drowning, and obviously relating, as we just do a little segue here, here's a Cape Dorset or Kingite print, a little bit Ningalep TV, wonderful image. Sedna relaxing with, with this creature. They're one and the same. They blend, they merge. It's a Sedna or Nuliayak image. Deep in thought. Deep in thought about what? Deep in thought about our planet. Deep in thought about our waters. Deep in thought about our future. And the Sakiayok exhibition coincided with the construction of the dam at Muskrat Falls, big hydroelectric project by Nalcor. That huge project that, even a Harvard-based study found that the methyl mercury impacts would be far greater than Nalcor's environmental assessment. So local folks, there's the Nunatsiavut flag there in the center, upside down Canadian flag, no kidding, protesting this going ahead, and this terrible moment when Billy Gauthier went on a hunger strike. And it was really frightening to see. He's a tremendous artist from Nunatsiavut. He and a few others going on a hunger strike, finally Nalcor acquiescing the hunger strike start, only for them subsequently to build it, and it all happened. And I'm not sure, no one's really sure what's happening with that methyl mercury poisoning now in the waters. But on the right here, my home is in my heart, is Valiakpa, a Sámi artist who's, you are standing in my bed, my privy is behind the bushes. You give me these papers, you say may own my land, but where, just like where are your stories? Where if this is your land, where are your stories, essentially? Relating to, you know, as a little bit of reference to Valiekpa, and here to Merit Anna Sara, excuse me, whose work is now on display at the Venice Biennale at the Sámi Pavilion. It used to be the Northern Pavilion, but this year it's the Sámi Pavilion. This is Pile o Sápmi, and these are reindeer heads from a forced cull of Sámi reindeer herders in Finland, or Finnmark. And Sámi traditionally would be reindeer herders or fishers or living off the land, and it's become a tremendously difficult livelihood because in northern Norway you have particularly wind turbines. And it's fascinating because those wind turbines are you know, they're company owned, so they're companies in Germany or wherever, and so it's investment by corporations into Sápmi. The Minister of Culture, non-Sámi woman, saying, yes, we must do something about this, but unable to navigate that, you know, what do they call it, wicked problem, the wicked problem of like how you prevent or reconcile or reckon, let's just use the word reckon, which is a term that Lacaluke, Williamson, Bathory says you can't have reconciliation without reckoning. Reckon to what you've done or what is happening that have systemic, economic, political, you know, so many manifold elements to them that they're very, very difficult to untangle. But here, Merit Anna Sara, you know, doing this gruesome image of, well, here's our pile of Sámi. And she went and did various other with the skulls and really incredible work. We did a big project that's still in process called Arctic Chills, talking about things that scare you, you know, that traditional stories. As Lisa Holmberg from the International Sámi Film Institute said, these are stories she heard as a kid, but sometimes those stories become all too alive, like the pile of Sápmi said. This is our final two slides here. This is Nilsen Taguna. He's a throat boxer artist from Baker Lake who we've worked with for a long time. And I was very intrigued. He came to York and we did a lot of work with him. And while he was at York, we recorded a song, and I'm just going to play you a little tiny bit of that song as an ending. And it's called If You Believe. And the lyrics are, well, if you stand up and touch the sky, if you believe in yourself and you try, you can have anything. If you believe, you can have anything you will achieve. And Nilsen wrote it. Let me just see if I can navigate this. It might be a little awkward, I apologize. In large response to the high suicide rates. So here we go. Bear with me here. Doesn't want to play. I apologize. Not sure why that's being like that. You know what? That's probably good because it gives it more time to talk. Anyway, it's a beautiful song. I'm sorry that I couldn't get that to play. I'll give it one more go just to see. I apologize. Okay, so I will go to Jan-Erik. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Anna. This was wonderful. Thank you for being so generous and sharing with us.